Thank you for listening to the ThePPod from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Please note, due to the nature of this podcast, themes relating to the abuse and neglect of children are discussed, with the content being designed for an adult audience for educational purposes in order to protect children from harm. Therefore, listener discretion is advised and the content unsuitable for children.
Welcome to the ThePPod.
Right then, welcome back to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I'm really pleased today to be joined by two of our colleagues in the safeguarding world who play a really vital role in terms of safeguarding children, making sure that the right service is in place at the right time. And I know do lots of work and are quite often sort of the virtual face of safeguarding in Somerset. And really pleased today to talk about the front door for both Family Intervention Service and Children's Social Care, what is now known as the Family Front Door. And pleased today to be joined by Lisa and Philippa. So welcome both. Thanks for coming along today. So do you want to start off just kind of introducing yourselves, sort of who you are and what your role is within the hub?
Yeah, so I'm Lisa Hucker and I'm one of the advanced practitioners in the Family Front Door service.
And I'm Philippa Small. I am one of the Family Front Door practitioners in the Family Front Door.
And thanks for coming out to join us today. I think it's going to be really good because often I think you talk to a lot of people across the workforce and they often have a lot of contact with you. And so it'll be good to kind of really explore the work that you do and sort of how that fits into the wider system, if that's okay. Do you want to start off just kind of explain to everybody who's listening what the Family Front Door is? Kind of what work do you do and what does the sort of team consist of?
Yeah, so at the Family Front Door, so we have 9 social workers within the team, both part-time and full-time, and we have 6 Family Front Door practitioners, and we are all overseen by 5 team managers that oversee all the work coming into the Family Front Door, and that's overseen by 1 operations manager. So our main responsibility, both in the early help service and the first response team, is to triage contacts that come through on an early help assessment and work out what the best course of support for families will be moving forward.
And actually, I just kind of obviously introduce you there as the Family Front Door. Things are always changing, things are always evolving. People may know you sort of previously as what was the early help hub and the first response team. So obviously sort of terminology has changed. Could you kind of explain that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So as you quite rightly said, originally we had the first response service who looked at and supported all those requests that came in for children's social care and children who are at risk. And then we also had the Early Help Hub who looked at and triaged the EHAs coming in for Family Intervention Service. But what was realised quite quickly was that actually those 2 teams were working quite closely together naturally because families don't fit into boxes. We step up, we step down all the time. Their needs are changing all the time. So those 2 teams were brought together and we now sit together at Bridgewater Police Station and also as part of the MASH, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure, so that we are constantly consulting with each other. We sit together, we talk about families that are coming in and we talk about the needs of those families and where best they might sit so that we're making sure we're getting the right support in place quite quickly for them.
I know people get confused sometimes as things change. So just to kind of emphasise, the Family Front Door is not a new service. It's just an amalgamation of what was already there and just sort of, like I say, bringing you both closer together.
Absolutely, yeah. And we both still exist. There's still First Response and Early Help Hub, but we're just together as one team really now.
You mentioned the sort of size of the team then. So we're not talking about a huge call centre here. Sorry, can you just remind me how many sort of social workers and...
So we've got 9 social workers currently in our team, both part-time and full-time, and then 6 Family Front Door practitioners. And that we have 5 team managers that across both teams that oversee all the work coming into the Family Front Door.
What sort of backgrounds of the team? Are they sort of your side, Lisa, I guess? Or all sort of previously sort of social workers within Somerset or wider?
So, yeah, we've got a variety of kind of backgrounds within the team. So myself, I have worked within assessment team in Somerset and safeguarding team before moving over to the family front door service. I know within Philippa's team, there's a background of some family front door practitioners with teaching background within the family intervention service. Yeah, and social workers that have worked across other teams within Somerset as well.
What about yourself, Philippa? What's sort of your background?
So my background is initially I was in family support, but not in Somerset. And then I worked as a PFSA for some time in another county. And then I went into supporting in domestic abuse charity and coordinating the children's team there. And then I came across to this role about 10 years ago now.
I think, am I right in thinking other people within your team, ex-primary teachers?
Yes, yeah, we've got 2 ex-primary teachers. And as Lisa said, we've got some ex-phys workers and, a whole mixture of background and experience in early help.
And it's good, I think, having those sort of that breadth of experience, isn't it? Because obviously you're in contact with a lot of people from across the sort of children's workforce in its broadest sense. And I personally think having that understanding, that empathy,
absolutely,
around sort of where people are coming from and being able to sort of, understand those perspectives and hopefully kind of make sure we get the right support in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding the challenges, I think, is really important, and understanding the challenges of sometimes engaging families in early help, and also in, if we're honest, in completing early help assessments. Sometimes they can take time, and it's about communicating with other agencies that might be working with that family as well. So we do understand those challenges and things, but we can bring that to being able to support those people.
And you mentioned early help assessments there, and if it's all right, we'll get onto that in a second, because I know that's really sort of quite a key part of your role. What other things do you sort of get up to within the family front door?
So we present on the advanced child protection training. So that is usually a social worker and a family front door practitioner that would present on that training. And we do some other partnership work across the county. We will talk to various organisations about the role at the family front door and talk about completing early help assessments and making sure, that professionals feel confident when completing these.
You mentioned the MASH then a moment ago. For anybody that doesn't know what MASH is, could you explain sort of what does MASH stand for and what does it do?
Yeah, so MASH stands for Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub. And just like Philippa mentioned a couple of minutes ago, so we are based at Bridgewater Police Station and Express Park, and we are co-located as part of the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub with our police colleagues and health colleagues. We do have, where we need to, we have meetings called the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Meetings, where our police colleagues and health colleagues attend that meeting to be able to have a multi-agency discussion around kind of a family and kind of understand the needs within the family and what's kind of the best support moving forward. That would come as part of the triage. So if an early help assessment was submitted, social workers would review that, have a kind of case reflection with a team manager as to whether a multi-agency safeguarding discussion needs to take place before kind of the best course of action is decided in terms of support for that family.
Yeah, is that sort of joined up working, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
Always hear that all the time in terms of making sure the information is joined up, it's shared in a timely way.
Yeah.
So basically, if you've got everybody in the room together, essentially, it's that ability to be able to say, okay, let's just get our heads together and just share this information and see what the bigger picture is. Absolutely.
And I think, when we'll come on to talk about our role within duty, but when there is an urgent safeguarding matter that comes in, it's about that timely response to responding to them concerns, having that kind of access to speaking and having them consultations with the police and with our health colleagues to kind of formulate that best plan, and also arrange strategy meetings in a timely manner.
So you just mentioned strategy discussions there for a second as well. Again, would you be able to sort of explain what a strategy discussion is? And I guess maybe what the difference is between a strategy discussion and a MASH discussion? Yeah,
so we would be looking to hold a strategy meeting when we've got concerns that a child has suffered or is likely to suffer significant harm. And the purpose of the strategy meeting would be for children's social care, the police and other partner agencies that are significant in that child family's life to come together to kind of understand what the concerns are and jointly make a decision around threshold application and talking about whether we need to be considering supporting the family under Section 47 of the Children Act 1989 or whether we need to be considering supporting the family under Section 17 of the Children Act.
So child protection or child in need.
Yeah.
So in terms of strategy discussion, more of a kind of legal framework around it, would you say? Whereas a MASH discussion is more of a kind of that pulling that information together?
It is, yeah. So I think the MASH discussion is based on a firewall of information being kind of shared within that multi-agency safeguarding meeting and an agreement with the agencies that are part of that, the statutory agencies, to be able to agree what can be shared outside of that meeting and what that best course of action is.
Thanks for clarifying that, because I know it's a question that comes up sometimes, and understanding the difference between the things and actually how we're making sure we're getting the right information together to make those decisions and quite difficult decisions sometimes. So I think just while we're talking about terminology for a moment, if it's okay, I think the other name that people might be aware of is Somerset Direct. So would you be able to sort of explain what the difference is between the Family Front Door and Somerset Direct?
So Somerset Direct is also that initial interface with professionals or members of the public. So if you were to ring Children's Social Care, you would initially come through to Somerset Direct, one of the call handlers. There are sort of two teams within Somerset Direct. There's the call handlers and there's the inputters. So obviously if you phone, you would speak to a call handler. If you send in an early help assessment, that early help assessment would be received by one of the inputters. They would input that information into the correct system, depending on whether you've requested Children's Social Care or Family Intervention Service. And that would then come through to our team managers, and they would review that information and allocate out to us as appropriate. So Somerset Direct, really, I think of them as that first interface, that first person that you're going to have contact with. And they are really equipped to answer those early help questions, those questions around how do I fill in that early help assessment, or where do I get this bit of information, or where do I get an early help assessment from, those sorts of things. They can make all those directions and support people with that. If you were needing more of a support around what threshold application am I going to be giving to this early help assessment, that's when you would be coming more towards the consultation line and speaking to one of the social workers, and they would be able to give that threshold advice. If you were, I don't know, maybe if Family Intervention Service is already involved with the family, maybe that maybe you're a member of school and you wanted to get hold of them, then you would ring Somerset Direct and they would be able to put you through to that Family Intervention Service worker.
Yeah, I think it's useful just to kind of explain sometimes the difference between them. But in terms of Somerset Direct, then that sort of first point of contact before it comes through to you, partly about the sort of that data handling, if you like, but also can give that sort of advice around that lower level kind of early help support.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
as well as kind of the HA itself.
Yes. So we used to have some people might remember the early help consultation line, which has now been amalgamated really into Somerset Direct supporting professionals, and also if that threshold application is required, then that would come through to the consultation line.
So let's talk about the consultation line for a moment, if we can. So in terms of the consultation line, sort of what's the purpose of that, and what sort of things do you see sort of coming through to the consultation line?
So the consultation line is set up for designated safeguarding leads within organisations to be able to access advice and guidance in terms of, like Philippa said, that threshold application, and just as kind of a use of a bit of a sounding board to be able to talk with a qualified social worker who covers that line every day. To be able to talk through kind of what the concerns are within the family, what services have already been offered, what support's been kind of offered already, what's been tried and tested, what's worked successfully, what's not worked so successfully. I'm really thinking about, does that need to come in at acute level, or does that need to come in at complex level for triage by the family front door practitioner or social worker to consider kind of stepping the family up for some additional support.
Right. And is that in terms of that line, is it sort of confidential? Is it anonymous?
It is. We ask that it's an anonymous line, so we don't take the family's details and we don't look at the children's file. We ask that it's anonymous. It's based on kind of the concerns present now. We will ask questions to the professional in terms of any history, if there's been Children's Social Care or the Family Intervention Service previous support, or if there's been like parent family support advisor support in the past, and we'd kind of tease out some of that's kind of happened before, but we do ask that it's anonymous.
And I know it's something that's really highly valued, actually. When I'm delivering training and things, people talk about the consultation line and talk very, very highly of it, and the advice you can give. And I think, just having that ability just to talk something through with somebody sometimes can be so key, couldn't it? And just kind of asking those questions and sort of, like you say, being able to pick it apart a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't consult on families that are already open to children's social care or the family intervention service, because we don't want to duplicate that advice from the allocated worker. So we would always ask if a family are open to the family intervention service or children's social care that they go direct to the allocated worker for that advice.
So do you see any sort of common themes coming through on the consultation line when you talk to practitioners?
I would say, just from kind of my experience when I've been the social worker on the consultation line, I would say sometimes it's maybe offering some kind of advice and guidance around maybe having some of them difficult conversations with parents and carers.
Right.
If there is a concern for a child, just about how professionals can kind of talk to parents and carers about that, and offering some advice.
Yeah, it could be. It's interesting that, because it's often a theme that comes up. In fact, I think we've talked about it in a number of these podcasts of that worry about having conversations with families when you have concerns, and often that feeling of, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to break down the relationship I've got with a parent. But again, as we talked about on these podcasts, actually what people want, what I want, what you want, I'm sure in your life, is we just want people to be transparent, open and honest with us.
Absolutely. And that's something that we very much plug as part of the advanced child protection training in terms of consent, because I know consent always comes up as kind of a topical area, especially when kind of completing early help assessments at kind of acute level, where actually that early help assessment, where safe to do so, we will be sharing them concerns with parents and carers. So we just ask that there is transparency in terms of sharing that early help assessment, sharing all that information. Obviously there's certain kind of elements of where you wouldn't be sharing that, where it's going to place a child at risk of significant harm or an adult at risk of serious harm. But we would ask that, that professionals are very transparent with parents and carers about what the nature of concern is. And just kind of being very mindful that when it does come into us at the family front door, we're going to be having them difficult conversations. And actually, it's not going to preserve that working relationship with that organisation if they're not being transparent. So it's really important kind of that them conversations are taking place very early on.
Yeah, definitely. There's always that thing to say, I don't want to break down the relationship with the parent, so I'm not going to talk to them about this. But then it comes back to them that you've shared that information without having that conversation with them, without being open, without being transparent, and that then breaks down that relationship, understandably, I think. But, so what, I know quite often it comes up that the consultation line is very well utilised. It can be really busy at times.
Yes.
I know quite often people say that they might try and call and it might be engaged, might be busy. I know you've tried a number of things over the years to try and sort of compensate for that and sort of try and make it more accessible. Would you be able to talk through some of the things that have been tried around the consultation line?
There's been a lot of development, because at one point the Early Help Hub had their own consultation line as well as children's social care, but the Early Help consultation line we found was very much underused. It wasn't being used much. Actually, all them concerns were kind of coming through the consultation line at children's social care. So that's kind of developed in it. Kind of we only have one line now. And that line is a qualified social worker sits on that line. I know it's we have looked at, some developments in terms of making it a bit more streamlined.
I think I'm right in thinking you tried an answer phone message at one point where people could leave messages, maybe?
Yeah, and that makes it very tricky, because we are still seeing some professionals calling us through the consultation line with urgent duty matters.
Right.
And the consultation line shouldn't be used for that. Them calls should be going direct through Somerset Direct and be taken by a social worker in live time.
Yeah.
So I think there's some kind of element of concern that if there's an answer phone message, that messages are going to be left and they're not then going to be responded to, because I think, like you've said, it's an incredibly busy line. There are certain kind of points during the day that it is more busy than others, but generally it is very consistently busy.
I think there was an issue a while back when you sort of trialled the answer phone messages as well, that people were leaving messages, but then you were spending hours trying to get back in contact with them and sort of chase those up and sort of round them off, wouldn't you?
It is, yeah. And I guess my advice would be just persevere. It is a busy line, but just be rest assured that there is a social worker that's kind of supporting that line. So just perseverance with trying to get through.
Are there any kind of peak times or times that people should particularly avoid?
I would say lunchtime does get particularly busy, or towards the end of kind of the school day.
Right.
But it is a fairly consistent line, so just persevere.
We do also find that the end of school term gets quite busy.
Okay.
Obviously, naturally, as school term's coming to an end, families aren't going to have that consistent contact with a professional, and concerns then get phoned in, don't we? And we also find that's a time when our referrals seem to peak at that time as well. So we've done a lot of work in the past with partners, particularly with the schools, around sort of bringing those concerns in a little bit earlier before the end of term, because then we've got time to triage that contact or that request much more consistently, in terms of being able to have contact with school staff when they're not off on holiday, have a really good understanding of the needs of that family and put support in a timely manner. Unfortunately, what has happened in the past is that referrals have come in right at the end of term. Then obviously school staff are off on holiday, we're not able to talk to them. And that makes it really hard for us to understand what that lived experience is for that family, especially if we have trouble contacting the family themselves. And then it's much more difficult for us to make that right decision in terms of support for them and get that in place quickly for that family.
It's an important point, isn't it? And I can understand that anxiety of, I need to pass this on to somebody before we're now off for the next 6 weeks. But actually that's not particularly helpful for the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes it's about just, as we've said, calling the consultation line or Somerset Direct, depending on where your concern is sitting, getting that advice around what agencies are out there to support families, because sometimes it's not actually needing the level of family intervention service or children's social care. Sometimes we could be utilising some of those voluntary agencies or charities that are around us in Somerset that could be supporting families at that lower level. So we'll be able to advise around who's out there for you.
Let's move on to EHA's early help assessments then, if we can, because that's obviously the kind of a large bulk of the work you do. Just kind of get an understanding around that. And how many, what sort of volume are we talking about here? How many early help assessments might be submitted to you kind of on a monthly basis or daily?
So Philippa's just kind of reflected that we do see a peak in our referral rates kind of around holiday times. But I think kind of on average, I would say approximately last month it was about 1,300. That's referrals coming into the family front door service. That's both children's social care and early help hub as well.
So that's quite a volume there, isn't it? So we're about 300, 350 a week. Well, my very kind of rough maths coming in. So, and that's a lot to triage and make sure that you're kind of making the right decisions around that. And how do you kind of manage that sort of volume with the relatively small team, I guess, that you are? So
as part of our triage, it's really important that we speak with parents, carers, that includes non-resident parents. It's really important that we seek their views, but also very important that we speak to professionals involved with children's lives, families' lives, to be able to triangulate all that information and make sure we get a full, good, rounded picture in terms of what's going on for the child or children in the family. So it's very important that we're able to kind of speak with these people to be able to then kind of make a decision in terms of what that best support is moving forward. So we do rely on kind of schools getting back to us in a timely way, which, we appreciate everybody's incredibly busy. But I think it's worth saying children's social care have a 24-hour period to turn contacts around, and the family intervention service
5 days.
5 days. So, we are working to them kind of time constraints. And, we need to kind of move things in a timely manner to make sure we're getting that appropriate support in place.
So there's a lot of work coming in. Got to be triaged, got to be processed in quite a short space of time. And I would guess within those early help assessments that come in, some are extremely urgent, where it comes into you and you go, right, we've got to potentially hold a strategy discussion right now. We've got to get this kind of dealt with. Others that come in where you think actually it might not be appropriate, as you were saying, Philippa. And there's a lot of decision-making process in a short space of time, isn't there? Out of that sort of volume that you receive, how many of those would you say from the triage process are appropriate for FIS, the Family Intervention Service, or Children's Social Care? What sort of percentages would we be talking about in terms of conversion rate, I guess, from being submitted to put through to allocation?
So last month, I know 346 out of the 1,386 went through for intervention by the Children's Social Care or the Family Intervention Service. Conversion rate into Children's Social Care is about 21%, and then conversion rate into Family Intervention Service is about 33%.
So we, any of those requests that come in that we feel don't hit threshold for either Family Intervention Service or Children's Social Care, we would be going back to those professionals who have referred in and advising them where we feel the most appropriate support would be coming from with a brief support plan. Very often, if the request was for Family Intervention Service, we might be going back and advising a team around the family meeting to pull together some agencies, or it might be that we are advising that perhaps some PFSA support would be appropriate to make sure that we're really implementing that graduated response. And we would always invite professionals to come back to us sort of if they disagree with our decision, because it's always possible that there's information that we may not have been aware of that would have a real impact on our decision making. But also it might be that a professional would agree with our decision making, but just want a little bit of extra advice or support. And that's absolutely what we're there for, is to support around that and how to put that support in place for that family.
So with the early help assessments, and it's obviously you look at EHAs day in and day out. What sort of things do you look for when you sort of first open up an early help assessment? What sort of things do you kind of instantly dive into to kind of focus in on? So
for me personally, if I'm triaging for a Family Intervention Service request, the first thing my eye goes to is who has sent in that request. So it needs to be really clear. So who the professional is, what your name is, with your contact details. That's really important. The next thing I look for is consent and the date of that consent. So really important to remember, if you're using an existing EHA and you're updating it, really important that we're updating that consent date as well, so we can show that we've got consent for that new information that's being shared. Moving on from there, I would be looking at which agencies are currently involved with that family, and it's really helpful, if possible, to have the name of the worker and contact details. That really helps us to have that sort of build that bigger picture and that jigsaw of who's already involved and what extra pieces do we need to add to that. After that, I would be looking for a really concise understanding of what is going on at the moment for that child and that family, and why you are feeling as a professional that support needs to come from outside for that family. So it could be that family has a very long history of support at a lower level, or it may have been that they've had past children's social care support, but just really concise. Bullet points are fine, but just so it's really clear from the beginning, what are the concerns now, and why are we today asking for that service to be brought into place? Sometimes I think it can be sort of tempting to put in a whole long history or chronology just to sort of back up your thinking, and I can completely understand that. I've certainly been there before as a professional, wanting to really impress the sort of level of my concern for a family. But I think it's about remembering that when we're looking at an EHA, we're looking for what are the risks now. It can, we can have a statement maybe of, I don't know, there may have been previous children's social care, and give the dates just to give us that background information, but we don't need all the detail. We do have access when we're triaging to the children's social care history for that family, which we always use as part of our triage. Both Children's Social Care and Family Intervention Service will look at both history. So we'll have that. What we need from you is what's going on now, what's your knowledge of what's going on for that family now. And then going on down, it's about your feeling of where that threshold sits for that family and why. Just, again, really brief. Some professionals are really thorough and they'll copy and paste parts of the threshold document. That's great, but what we really need is just your understanding of why you're placing that family at that threshold, and then sending it in to us to the correct place, really.
Thank you. Actually, that's really helpful, because like you say, I think quite often people say to me, I feel like I've got to put everything in there in order to get everything across, all the information across. Yeah. But like you say, I think I know certainly from years ago, before the family front door, before the early help hub was set up, and I was sort of involved with triaging early help assessments, and some of them you get pages and pages and pages in length, and actually it's so
and
hard.
you lose sight of the child, and that's, I think that the only thing I would kind of add to that is the voice of the child. Definitely. Actually, if a child is at an age where they can express themselves, has the professional spoken with that child? Have we got the child's voice within that EHA? Have we got parents and carers' views within that? And also considering, is this an only child? Is there siblings in the household? Have we had consent to be able to maybe speak to the other children's school? So we can kind of build up that rounded picture in terms of that child as well. It's really useful to have an EHA that has the contribution of other agencies as well that are working with that family and can offer that knowledge in terms of the circumstances. But certainly the child's voice and kind of what is that impact? Okay, we've identified this concern, but actually what are we seeing in terms of the impact on that child?
The so what, isn't it? We keep on coming back to. Do you often see in early help assessments the what, but not so much the so what?
Yes, very much. So EHAs can be very good at explaining what the problem is. But as you say, what's lacking is that child's voice, the impact on the child. What's their lived experience within that? Because as we know, children have very different tolerance levels. One child might be in a situation where they're actually still thriving and doing really well, whereas another child in exactly the same situation could be really struggling. So it's really important that we've got the so what, the lived experience of the child. And as Lisa quite rightly says, the voice of the child. And in whatever form that can be gathered is absolutely fine. And again, using the child's words, their exact words where possible, not our interpretation of those words. And again, with the family, really helping that family to find a positive. There's an area on the EHA for what's going well and what's not going well. And I would argue that there is no family we're working with where nothing's going well. It could be that they're sat having a conversation with you about the EHA. That's a really great strength. But helping them to find that, because that's how we gain their trust and move forward and be able to support them in the future. If
we were to summarise here in terms of those kind of top tips, I guess, what you look for. So what have we got? So we've got voice of the child.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got keeping it concise, clear and concise, and contemporary. I guess from what else you said, what's happening now, what's important right now. And I think the other bit we just sort of picked out is the so what, the impact. What does this actually mean? Any other sort of top tips? Any other kind of bullet points you'd want to give people?
We're just considering if there's any other children in the family. Yep. If there's a situation that's impacting on a particular child, actually, what does that mean for the other children in the household? And not seeing that child in isolation, because actually, for example, I'm using school here, but what school may see in that particular child, actually, by talking to other kind of agencies that are working with that family, can give such a more rounded picture in terms of what could be going on and the reasons behind some of that. So I think it's really important to try and triangulate some of that information with other partner agencies that are working with families to give the requester much more insight in terms of what they're asking for in terms of support and how best they can support families kind of within their organisation as well. Just
picking up, Philippa, from something you said a moment ago, if somebody doesn't agree, just pick up the phone and have a conversation with you. Yeah. Again, I was just, as we were talking, I was just thinking back to the years when I was sort of triaging. And do you find sometimes with that when you're talking to somebody, they'll say, yeah, but how can you say that? Because this is going on and that's going on. And actually you haven't seen that.
No, that was in the EHA.
Right.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to ask. I used to experience that quite a lot of you kind of read something, you think, no, this isn't appropriate. You contact somebody and they're literally kind of pulling their hair out going, how do you say that? Because of all this, that and the other. But you say, well, I can't see that.
Yeah,
in what
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that from, again, as you say, it happens. And I think that partly might be because of worries about those conversations with parents. And quite often I'll ring a professional and say, just talk me through your thinking before I ring a parent, because it might be that something has changed since the EHA's come in, as we know, things for change for families on a daily basis. So I've got a really current view before I speak to mum or dad. And they'll say, oh, just so you know, this is also going on. And it is about going back and saying, well, actually, that needs to be in the EHA. And if that's a difficult conversation, we need to look at those conversations with families and actually really thinking about, why is that a difficult conversation? Who's it difficult for? Is quite a difficult thing sometimes for us to really think about. And if that is going to be a difficult conversation, using the consultation line or using Somerset Direct for advice about how to have those conversations, and just making sure that we've got a really clear view of everything that's going on for that family, because that can really help us when we're talking to that family and we can have that really honest conversation with them. And I'm sure Lisa's had the same experience, but very often I've spoken to parents and I've And I've felt that difficulty in that conversation and, sort of really chosen my words carefully and sensitively. And the parent said, oh, thank goodness. I haven't known how to talk to anyone, but thank you for bringing that up. And actually, it can be a real relief for parents. And sometimes the anxiety we feel as professionals can actually also be felt by the family. And sometimes we have to be the one to bring those things up for them and bring that safety to that conversation as well. So, yes, very important to include everything.
And so in terms of the process then, so obviously it comes into you guys. You would sit, you would read through, you would triage that. You mentioned just then about contacting the person that submitted that. So would that be the sort of the next step after sort of that initial sort of read through? And you mentioned sort of contacting parents as well. So what kind of steps would you go through?
Yeah, so if, like Philippa's just said, we would read through the early help assessment, and I would say most of the time we start off by contacting the referrer, because I think what we want to do is really clarify our understanding, our interpretation of the early help assessment, the information that's been shared, check out that the situation hasn't changed since that's been kind of submitted, before then making contact with parents, both parents where appropriate to do so, or carers. And then we would look at doing some wider agency checks with the consent from parents, just to kind of get a fuller picture in terms of what's going on for that child or children. I think we've talked a lot about early help assessments, but we also kind of triage a lot of police reports, ambulance reports, kind of NHS 111 reports, referrals that come from CAFCAS, the Home Office. So, there's a lot of variety in kind of the contacts that we are looking at. And we are also taking live calls from members of the public as well. So, for example, if a member of the public comes to us with a concern that there's been a domestic incident or there's been some police involvement in a family, we would then be seeking to get that information from the police and requesting, some further information. So, it's kind of thinking about what information we need to be able to get a fuller picture to be able to make that decision. Yeah. And talking to parents about what they think is the right support moving forward. That was that's a really important kind of element of understanding what they think, because they're their experts, aren't they, of their lives, and kind of can give their views in terms of what they think is going to be helpful. Yeah.
Do you have it where you contact a parent and say, I'm from, would you say children's services, from children's social care?
Children's social care, yeah.
And do you find sometimes the instant reaction is, oh my God, you're here to take my kids away?
We do, yeah. I would say, there is times I'm having conversations with parents about, that's not the purpose of my call. Actually, we've had this concern raised, and, we need to be very transparent with you in terms of what these concerns are and understanding kind of what's going on for you as a family. And it's about alleviating them worries. That actually we're not there to take their children away. We're there to keep children safe and identify what them risks look like and work with them as families to be able to, support to keep children safe.
Let's be honest, there is big social stigma, isn't there, for having to admit sometimes, like I say, that you might need help, might need support, and especially from children's social care, with that stigma around social workers there just, seeking to remove children left, right and centre, whereas actually nothing could be further from the truth. And
I guess, that's where the transparency comes in. It's about building trust with parents and carers and being very clear in terms of what information we have. I'm very clear that where appropriate and safe to do so, information is shared in a transparent way. You are seeking to kind of build them trust. And I guess where I tend to get a lot of kind of parents saying that they're worried about their children being removed is where they've maybe had experiences of children's social care in the past throughout their childhood. But it's where, you need to talk openly in terms of what we're seeking to kind of achieve and with them.
I would also say, from our point of view, when we're triaging for family intervention service, is we introduce ourselves slightly differently on the phone, because obviously we're not social workers. So I personally, when I'm ringing a family, I would say I'm Philippa and I'm calling from the family front door. And it's about discussing with parents actually that I'm not a social worker. I'm calling regarding early help support for their family. And very often it's about families needing to understand what the difference, if that is, and they don't understand what the difference is.
Yeah, why would they?
Exactly. And they just hear children and families team and for many of the public, actually, that's all social workers. And for me, actually, the bigger issue of that is about families understanding why an early help assessment has been submitted in the first place and who it's being submitted to. So that comes back to that transparency with parents, that consent, and not just gaining consent to complete an EHA, but that informed consent of what that really means. And really importantly, sadly, many families that we call now, they don't have a copy of their early help assessment. They don't know what's written on it. They've never seen it. So I think that's a really important message, is, where possible, to be sharing that early help assessment with families each time it's written. So they have a copy and an understanding of what's been shared, who it's been shared with, and therefore when we phone, they're a little bit more at ease as to why we're phoning, and that conversation's a little easier.
So under what circumstances would you not want to share an early help assessment with a family?
So where it would place a child at risk of significant harm, or an adult at risk of serious harm, or where there's a serious crime being committed, where we obviously need to be mindful in terms of the police investigation, but we don't want to delay any kind of safeguarding support given to a family. So where it's going to delay some kind of action being taken by children's social care, we would be kind of talking to the requester about why that consent has not been obtained. But I think if there is any uncertainty in terms of consent, the consultation line's there, or if it's something that's urgent, if it's an immediate safeguarding concern for a child or children, that comes through Somerset Direct, and a social worker will have that discussion with you in terms of that consent. There are certain situations where we need to manage that information sharing with parents very carefully. So, for example, if a disclosure has been made by a child and actually they're really worried about parents finding out, we will, have them quite open conversations with the requester to say, that's something we can manage, or we can kind of support you to manage at a time that we know that we're going to be able to act on this.
So in terms of the work you do, obviously we've talked about the work you do within the family front door, your sort of day-to-day work in terms of the consultation line, the early help assessment, triage, the MASH, that sort of things. Is there any work you do to kind of support organisations sort of outside of the kind of office work, if you like?
Yeah, so we do, part of our role is around partnership work. So within that, we have a slot where we come and present on the advanced safeguarding training with yourself, Steve. We also offer support and advice to other professionals. So we've done quite a lot of work with schools over the years, gone in and supported around early help assessment completion, early help services generally in Somerset, and working in the sort of team around the family process. We've also delivered that training with some of the voluntary agencies in Somerset. So any professionals who are thinking, that might be really useful for our organisation or for our school or wherever you work, we're more than happy to consider that and look at whether it would be family front door practitioner or a social worker, or it might be both of us come out together and just support around that, and sort of there's a really good understanding of that process.
If anybody wanted to find out more, then where would you signpost them to?
So I would signpost them to Somerset County Council website, looking at children's social care. There's also professional choices, which is where all of our early help documentation is, if you need the early help document. And there's a lot of advice documents on there as well around early help and completing. All the services that are available to request through the early help assessment are on there with information. And obviously the SSCP website will have all the information as well for them.
Perfect, lovely. Thanks, Philippa. And I'll pop a link in the description for all of those. And if you want to find the number for the consultation line, as Philippa just mentioned, we have got the report of concern, big red button. It's become known on our website, the SSCP website, where you can find all the numbers there for Somerset Direct and for the consultation line if you should need them. And I really would encourage anybody, if you're uncertain about all these things we've talked about today in relation to a family you're working with, do give them a ring, because I have to, completely honestly, every time when I'm delivering training and people talk about the consultation line, they talk about it really, really positively and say it's absolutely invaluable to them. So would encourage people to use that. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for coming in today. It's been great talking to you both, and I hope that's been useful for everybody to kind of get that sort of understanding about the work that you do and the wider work that you do as well, and hopefully a few tips as well around the early help assessment. So thank you very much, both of you, for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
See you again soon. No, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care. As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, please go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in today's episode. If you enjoyed listening to the ThePPod, we'd really appreciate it if you took the time to follow or subscribe to us on your chosen platform, or even better, leave us a review to let other people know about it. It really does help to spread the word. And talking about spreading the word, don't forget to tell others about it and encourage them to join us here as well. Now, if you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to give a huge thank you to my guests, Lisa Hucker and Philippa Small from the Family Front Door, and as always, I'd like to thank you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the Training Manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership, and I look forward to you joining us again next time at the ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.